The crystal tumbler in Richard's hand caught the evening light as he pointed it at me, ice cubes clinking accusingly against the glass. "After all we sacrificed, you betrayed us in the worst possible way." His voice cracked on the final words, emotions slipping through the carefully maintained facade of the man who had raised me since I was 8 years old. I remained standing by the fireplace in my mother and stepfather's immaculate living room, my hands steady despite the hurricane of emotions threatening to tear me apart from the inside. 20 years of compliance, of smothering my own desires to fulfill their expectations, had prepared me for this moment, the moment I finally chose myself. "I applied to medical school," I replied quietly. "I didn't commit a crime." The words hung in the air between us, deceptively simple, yet carrying the weight of 2 decades of accumulated resentment. My mother sat rigidly on the edge of the Italian leather sofa, her expression frozen in that particular way it always did when confrontation threatened her carefully cultivated world of appearances. "Don't you dare minimize this, Charlotte," Richard said, setting his drink down with such controlled precision that I knew he was furious. "You went behind our backs, applied to schools across the country without a word to us. After everything we've built for you at the firm, the law firm of Harrington and Wells, my stepfather's legacy, the place where I'd spent the last 6 years of my life, since graduating college with the political science degree they'd chosen for me. The golden handcuffs that came with an executive position created specifically for the daughter Richard had always wanted, but never had biologically. I never asked you to build anything for me," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. At 28, I was finally finding the courage that had eluded me for so long. "I never wanted to be a lawyer. You knew that. You've always known that." My mother made a small, distressed sound. "Charlotte, please, your father." "Stepfather," I corrected automatically, then immediately regretted it when I saw Richard flinch. The wound was an old one, festering beneath the surface of our family's polished veneer. Richard had raised me, had paid for my education, had given me opportunities most people would kill for. But he had also systematically dismantled every dream I'd ever had that didn't align with his vision for me. "After everything I've done for you," Richard continued as if I hadn't spoken, his voice low and dangerous now, "this is how you repay me? By throwing it all away for some childish fantasy." I closed my eyes briefly, memories washing over me. 16-year-old Charlotte sobbing as Richard methodically explained why my summer medical program acceptance was being declined. Because I needed to focus on debate team and AP government. 19-year-old Charlotte changing my major from pre-med to political science after Richard cut off my tuition funding. 22-year-old Charlotte accepting a position at the firm instead of applying to medical school because my mother begged me not to throw away this opportunity and break your father's heart. When I opened my eyes, my resolve had hardened. I've repaid you by giving you 6 years of my life doing work that makes me miserable. I've repaid you by sacrificing my own dreams to fulfill yours. I've repaid you by being the daughter you designed rather than the one you got. Richard's face flushed dark red. "How dare you? We gave you everything. Everything. Do you have any idea what kind of life you would have had if I hadn't married your mother? If I hadn't taken you both in after your deadbeat father abandoned you? My biological father, the boogeyman of my childhood, the cautionary tale, the reason I should be eternally grateful for Richard's presence in my life." I had exactly 3 memories of the man who had walked out when I was 5. The smell of his aftershave, the sound of his laugh, and the Mickey Mouse Band-Aid he'd put on my knee after I fell off my bike. The rest was a carefully crafted narrative, shaped and molded by Richard and my mother to ensure my compliance. "This isn't about my father," I said. "This is about me finally doing what I've always wanted to do. What I've told you I wanted to do since I was 12 years old." "You were a child," Richard exploded, abandoning his carefully controlled demeanor. Children want to be astronauts and movie stars and veterinarians. Adults understand responsibility, legacy, practicality. My mother finally found her voice. Charlotte, honey, what your father means is that we've invested so much in your future at the firm. The clients respect you. The junior associates look up to you. In a few years, you could be made partner, and then I'd still be miserable, I finished for her, just with more money and responsibility. Richard stalked toward me, stopping just a foot away. I could smell the bourbon on his breath, see the slight tremble in his manicured hands. You think medical school is going to make you happy? You think starting over at 28, when you have no experience, no connections in that world, is going to be fulfilling? You are throwing away everything we've built for a pipe dream. No, I countered, refusing to back down physically or emotionally, though every instinct screamed at me to apologize, to retract, to return to the safety of compliance. I'm finally refusing to throw away my life for your dream. The acceptance letter had arrived 3 weeks ago, tucked inside an innocuous envelope that I'd retrieved from my mailbox with trembling hands. Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, my first choice, the school I'd dreamed about since I was a teenager poring over medical journals while my peers read fashion magazines. I'd applied in secret, studied for the MCAT during lunch breaks and late nights, volunteered at a free clinic on weekends when I'd told my parents I was working overtime. The acceptance had felt like both validation and terror, proof that I could have been on this path all along, confirmation that I'd wasted years of my life trying to please people who would never be satisfied. You have no idea what sacrifice means, Richard said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. None. Your mother and I gave up everything to give you the life you have. Something in me snapped at those words, the same words he'd been using to control me for 20 years. What exactly did you give up, Richard? Your bachelor lifestyle? The freedom to date women who weren't encumbered with a young daughter? Because from where I'm standing, you gained a lot more than you sacrificed. My mother gasped. Charlotte, that's enough. But it wasn't enough. Not after years of silence, of acquiescence, of swallowing my words until they hardened into stones in my stomach. You didn't sacrifice, Richard. You invested. You saw a young, beautiful woman with a daughter you could mold into your perfect heir, and you invested. Every piano lesson, every summer camp, every tuition payment wasn't a sacrifice. It was a down payment on controlling my future, on making sure I became exactly what you wanted. Richard stared at me as if I'd slapped him. Is that really what you think of me? That I'm some sort of puppet master? That I haven't loved you like my own daughter? The genuine hurt in his voice made me falter, doubt creeping in around the edges of my certainty. Had I misread everything? Had I constructed a villain where there was only a father doing what he thought was best? But then I remembered the night I'd received my first college acceptance letter to Columbia with a pre-med track. Richard had taken one look at it and said, "Impressive, but Georgetown's political science program will be better for your future at the firm." Not a question, not a discussion, a decree. I think you love the idea of me, I said softly. The daughter who follows in your footsteps, who carries on your legacy, who validates all your life choices. But that's not love, Richard. That's ownership. My mother stood abruptly, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. This is insane. You're talking like we've been some kind of monsters. Like we haven't given you every advantage, every opportunity. Every opportunity you approved of, I corrected. None that I actually wanted. And you think running away to medical school is the answer? Richard asked, incredulity sharpening his tone. Starting over from scratch at your age? I'm 28, not 78, I retorted. And yes, I think following the dream I've had since I was a child is a better answer than spending the next 40 years in a career that makes me dread waking up each morning. Richard's face hardened, the vulnerability of a moment ago replaced with cold fury. If you do this, You're on your own, completely. No financial support, no connections, no safety net. It was the ultimate threat, the one that had kept me in line for years. The fear of being alone, of struggling financially, of losing the only family I had left. But I'd prepared for this, had been saving and planning for years, squirreling away portions of my admittedly generous salary, living well below my means while everyone assumed I was as extravagant as they were. "I understand," I said simply. My calm acceptance seemed to enrage Richard further. "You think you understand? You have no idea what it's like out there, without connections, without support. Your mother was barely keeping a roof over your heads when I met her. Is that what you want? To end up desperate and dependent?" The mention of my mother's past struggles, another weapon frequently deployed to ensure my gratitude, made something inside me harden. "What I want is to help people, Richard. What I want is to use my brain for something that matters to me. What I want is to stop living my life according to your blueprint." I turned to my mother, who was watching our exchange with mounting distress. "Mom, I love you. I'm grateful for everything you've done for me, but I need to do this. I need to find out who I am outside of what Richard wants me to be." My mother's face crumpled. "Charlotte, please. Your father loves you. We both do. We only want what's best for you." "No," I said gently. "You want what's easiest, what fits your narrative, what doesn't rock the boat." Richard's voice dropped dangerously low. "After all we've done for you, after all we sacrificed. And this is how you repay us? By throwing it all away? By betraying us in the worst possible way?" His voice broke on the final words, genuine emotion cracking through his controlled exterior. I looked at the man who had raised me, who had given me both privilege and prison, and felt a complex mixture of gratitude, resentment, and, surprising even myself, compassion. He was a product of his own upbringing, his own father's expectations, his own limited vision of what success looked like. "I'm not betraying you," I replied, my voice steady and clear. "I'm saving myself." The words hung in the air, simple yet revolutionary. For 20 years, I believed that choosing myself would be the ultimate selfishness, the ultimate betrayal of all I owed my parents. Now I understood it was the only way to honor the person I was meant to be. Richard stared at me for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Not acceptance, not yet, but perhaps the first grudging acknowledgement that I was no longer the compliant child he could control. "You'll fail," he said finally, "and when you do, don't come crawling back expecting us to pick up the pieces." It was a desperate last salvo, a final attempt to instill doubt, to make me question my capabilities. In the past, it might have worked. Now, it only strengthened my resolve. "I might fail," I acknowledged, "but at least I'll have tried, and that's more than I can say for the last decade of my life." I retrieved my purse from the side table, suddenly exhausted by the confrontation, but lighter than I felt in years. The hardest part was done. The truth was out. Whatever came next, the struggle, the work, the rebuilding of my life from the ground up, would be my choice, my path. As I moved toward the door, my mother called after me, her voice small and broken. "Charlotte, please, don't leave like this." I paused, my hand on the doorknob. "I'm not leaving you, Mom. I'm just finally choosing the life I want. I hope someday you can be happy for me." Richard remained by the fireplace, his face set in stone, eyes fixed on some middle distance, as if he couldn't bear to watch me go. The man who had controlled every aspect of my life for 20 years was suddenly powerless in the face of my determination. Outside, the evening air was cool against my flushed face. I walked to my car, each step taking me further from the prison of expectations and closer to the uncertain freedom of self-determination. My hands trembled slightly as I put the key in the ignition, not from doubt, but from the overwhelming relief of finally speaking my truth. As I pulled away from the sprawling house that had never felt like a true home, I glanced in the rearview mirror. My mother stood in the doorway, a small, diminished figure watching me leave. Richard was nowhere to be seen. For a moment, doubt and guilt threatened to overtake me. Was I making a terrible mistake? Throwing away security and certainty for a difficult path with no guaranteed outcome? But as the house receded in my mirror, another emotion gradually replaced the doubt: hope. I touched the acceptance letter tucked inside my purse, the tangible proof that another life was possible. In 8 weeks, I would be starting classes at Johns Hopkins, surrounded by people who shared my passion for medicine, for healing, for making a difference. The road ahead would be difficult, harder perhaps than Richard realized. I was under no illusions about the challenges of medical school, especially as an older student who had been out of academia for years. There would be financial struggles, sleepless nights, moments of doubt when Richard's predictions of failure would echo in my mind. But as I drove away from my past toward my future, one thought sustained me, burning bright against the gathering darkness. For the first time in 20 years, I was finally, truly free. 3 months later, I stood in my tiny Baltimore apartment, unpacking the last of my boxes. Medical school orientation was in 2 days. And despite the lingering anxiety about whether I could succeed in this new path, excitement thrummed through my veins. The apartment was a far cry from my luxury condo in Boston, a 1-bedroom walk-up with creaky floors and temperamental plumbing. My savings would cover rent and basic expenses for the first year, supplemented by the scholarship I'd been awarded and the part-time research position I'd secured in one of the labs. It would be tight, but manageable. Freedom, I was learning, often came with a price tag. The knock on my door was so unexpected that I froze, wondering if I'd imagined it. When it came again, more insistent, I wiped my dusty hands on my jeans and went to answer it. My mother stood in the hallway, looking out of place in her designer clothing and perfect makeup. She held a large gift bag in one hand and what looked like a travel case in the other. "Mom," I breathed, shocked to see her. We'd spoken only twice since that night. Brief, strained conversations where neither of us mentioned Richard or my choice to leave the firm. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice uncertain in a way I'd rarely heard before. I stepped back, gesturing her inside. She entered cautiously, taking in the modest surroundings with an unreadable expression. "It's small," I said defensively, "but it's close to campus and affordable." My mother set the gift bag on my small kitchen counter. "It's nice, Charlotte. It has character." The awkward compliment made me smile despite myself. "What are you doing here, Mom? Does Richard know you came?" A shadow crossed her face at the mention of my stepfather. "Richard and I, we're taking some time apart." The revelation stunned me into silence. In all my life, I'd never imagined my mother standing up to Richard, much less separating from him. She had always been his perfect complement, the supportive wife, the social director, the quiet voice urging compliance in the name of peace. "What happened?" I finally managed to ask. My mother looked down at her perfectly manicured hands. "After you left, I started thinking about all the things you said, about control and expectations and dreams." She met my eyes, and I was startled to see a strength there I hadn't recognized before. "I realized I've been living the same way you were, following Richard's blueprint, suppressing my own desires to keep the peace." "Mom," I said, my throat tight with unexpected emotion. "I'm not saying he's a bad man," she continued quickly. "He isn't. He loves us both in his way. But he only knows one way to love, with conditions, with expectations. And I spent 23 years making myself smaller to fit into the space he allocated for me." She straightened her shoulders slightly. "I don't want to do that anymore." I stared at my mother, seeing her clearly, perhaps for the first time. Not as an extension of Richard, not as the passive enabler of my constrained life, but as a woman who had made her own compromises, followed her own path of least resistance. "What will you do?" I asked. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "I've enrolled in some classes at the community college. Art history. It's what I was studying when I met your father. Your biological father, I mean, before life took a different turn. The revelation of this hidden part of her past, a dream abandoned long before Richard entered our lives, made me see my mother in an entirely new light. She had been young once, with ambitions of her own, before circumstance and practicality had narrowed her path. That's amazing, Mom, really. She gestured to the gift bag on the counter. I brought you something, for your new beginning. Inside the bag was a brand new stethoscope, top of the line, far nicer than what I budgeted for myself, and beneath it, a small leather-bound book. What's this? I asked, pulling out the book. Your grandfather's journal. My father's, she clarified. He was a country doctor in Minnesota. Did you know that? I shook my head slowly, stunned by this revelation. You never told me. She smiled sadly. There's a lot I never told you, Charlotte. A lot I let get buried under Richard's plans and expectations. But my father was a doctor, a good one. He died when I was 16, and I think part of me was afraid when he first started talking about medicine, afraid of losing you the way I lost him. I opened the journal with trembling hands, scanning the neat handwriting that detailed patient visits, treatments, reflections on the practice of medicine in rural America in the 1950s. My grandfather, a man I'd never known existed, had followed the path I was only now finding the courage to pursue. Medicine is in your blood, Charlotte, my mother said softly. Maybe I always knew that. Maybe that's why I fought so hard against it. Tears stung my eyes as I looked up at her. Why didn't you ever tell me about him? Richard didn't like me talking about my past, said we needed to focus on our future, not dwell on what came before. She took a deep breath. But I should have told you, should have supported your dreams instead of suppressing them out of my own fear and Richard's control. I closed the distance between us, wrapping my arms around her slender frame. She stiffened momentarily. Physical affection had never been common in our household, before relaxing into the embrace. I'm sorry, she whispered against my hair. And so sorry I wasn't stronger for you. You're being stronger now, I replied, holding her tight. That's what matters. When we finally separated, both wiping away tears, my mother gestured to the travel case she'd brought. I'm staying at a hotel nearby for a few days. I thought, if you wanted, I could help you finish setting up your apartment. Maybe we could explore the city a bit before your classes start. The offer, tentative, uncertain, but genuine, was a bridge across the chasm that had opened between us. Not a full reconciliation, not yet, but a beginning. I'd like that, I said. There's a farmer's market tomorrow morning that's supposed to be good. We could go together. My mother nodded, a cautious hope lighting her eyes. I'd like that too. As we finished unpacking my remaining boxes, working together in a comfortable silence we'd rarely shared before, I thought about Richard's accusation that night. 3 months ago, after all we sacrificed, you betrayed us in the worst possible way. He had been wrong on both counts. What he called sacrifice had been investment in his own vision, not mine. And what he called betrayal had been liberation, not just for me, but perhaps for my mother as well. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Medical school would test me in ways I couldn't yet imagine. My relationship with Richard remained fractured, possibly beyond repair. My mother's newfound independence was fragile, untested, but for the first time in my adult life, I was charting my own course, following a dream that had persisted despite years of active suppression. And in doing so, I had somehow given my mother permission to reclaim parts of herself long surrendered. As evening fell over Baltimore, my new city, I stood at the window of my small apartment and watched the lights coming on across the cityscape. Somewhere among those lights was Johns Hopkins, where in 2 days I would take my first step toward becoming Dr. Charlotte Weber. Not the lawyer Richard had demanded, not the compliant daughter he had expected, but the healer I had always known I could be. I touched the stethoscope my mother had brought, running my fingers over the cool metal, and felt a sense of rightness settle deep in my bones. Whatever came next, struggle or success, hardship or triumph, I would face it on my own terms. And that made all the difference. Retry. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.